Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to the Open Meetings Compliance Board annual meeting. My name is Janice Clark. I am the administrator to the board, and I just have a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to the chair. Please first make sure that you're muted and your video is turned off so as not to distract from the board's meeting. And additionally, I want to inform you that this meeting is going to be recorded and posted to the board's website, and when it's available, and it will be posted as minutes to the meeting. With that said, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ms. Lynn Marshall, our new board chair. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Janice, and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Nancy in particular. It's very nice to finally meet you virtually, at least. As Janice indicated, I'm the newly appointed chair and a newly appointed member of the board. I was just appointed last month in July. So at the outset, I'd ask everyone, please be kind as I make my way through this meeting. So I will call to order the 2020 annual meeting. We do have a quorum present. Myself and my colleague Nancy Duden, our third position on the board is currently vacant, but the two members do constitute a quorum. So Nancy, could you introduce yourself to the observers?
Yes, thank you, Lynn, and welcome. I'm looking forward to working with you. I am Nancy Duden, formerly the county attorney for Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and currently the legal director at the YWCA of Annapolis. And I have been a member of the Open Meetings Compliance Board now for about a year and a half. And I'm excited to work with Lynn. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm looking forward to working with you as well. And just a small bit of my background. I'm also a practicing attorney, a longtime practicing attorney, and a lifelong resident of our great state of Maryland. And I'm looking forward to serving on the board and assisting public bodies in complying with the Open Meetings Act. So we did publish our agenda. Our first item on the agenda substantively is comments on the past year's board work. And what I'd like to do for that, because I am so new to the board, is to defer to Nancy to comment on the past year's work if you have any comments, Nancy.
Thank you, Lynn. Again, this is Nancy Duden for anybody who doesn't have video capability. We had a consistent level of work last fiscal year. We received 29 written complaints from 22 different entities and/or individuals, and we ended up issuing a total of 26 opinions. Out of those 26 opinions that we issued, we found 9 violations. There was only one entity that had repeat violations, and that was the Howard County Board of Education. When you do a redistricting, as Howard County was doing, there are a lot of meetings and a lot of opportunity for missteps. So we did find that they were in compliance on 5 of those complaints. There were 5 complaints and they were in compliance on 2, and we found violations in 3. I'm not going to go through each complaint that we had, obviously, for time, but I did want to highlight 2 things that I thought were important. First of all is the board's opinion on email exchanges, which was in 14 OMCB Opinions 29, where we do address electronic communications. These were in situations that we had not encountered previously. I would ask that those listening refer to that opinion to read the full facts and everything. But basically, the guidance that we ended up giving is that public bodies and the members of public bodies really need to think about their electronic communications, specifically text messages and emails, when they are in the middle of considering public business. If you're sitting up on a council dais and you're exchanging text messages that say, hey, do you want to grab a sandwich afterwards? I'm starving. That, of course, is not subject to the Open Meetings Act. But if you start exchanging text messages that say things like, do you know how you're going to vote on number 3? Certainly that is something that the public is supposed to be able to consider. So I would ask that people refer to those for guidance. And then the other matter that I wanted to just touch on very briefly is our opinion on Ocean City. That's at 14 OMCB Opinions 49. I point this out because it was a violation that went on for a significant amount of time. This was surrounding the extension of the lease on Ocean City's pier. And it's a good reminder to people that this board does not look at things like possible procurement violations or possible violations of local statutes on things. We are only advising on open meetings. And in that case, there were many deliberations that went on for about 18 months that resulted in violations. And so again, I would refer the listeners to the opinion itself as containing a lot of good information going forward. Having said that, there's really not anything else unusual from the past year, and I look forward to serving again this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. This is Lynn again, the chair. So moving on then to our next agenda item, which is issues to study or recommend for legislative action. And here again, Nancy, with my being so new and with our recently having a vacancy, so we're awaiting the appointment of our third board member. My opinion is that the board shouldn't recommend legislation this year. And obviously, personally, I'm still familiarizing myself with the issues that come before the board. So what are your thoughts, Nancy?
I would agree with that, Lynn. I think coupled with the sort of turnover on the board, which you've referenced, in addition to the fact that last session and possibly General Assembly session coming up, we're dealing with the pandemic. It's not a good point in time for us to consider legislative initiatives and priorities. We can certainly discuss them as the year goes on, but I agree that it's not the best time to put things forward.
Okay, great. I totally agree with that. So that takes us to, and that's one of our small open items on our draft annual report. That takes us to our next item, which is reviewing the draft report that was prepared by staff. I've previously reviewed it. Do you have it in front of you, Nancy?
I do.
Okay. So I'm looking at the draft, which is about 18 pages. And for the listeners, the observers, I'll just go through and briefly summarize the various sections of the draft. This is our 28th annual report. I'm looking on the first page. There's an introduction. And the introduction talks about how we're an independent state board. It also talks about the fact that I'm a new chair, newly appointed, as I indicated. The second term of our former chair recently expired. She's April Ishak, and I would like to, at this point, thank her on behalf of the board for her long time service and for her leadership. Also, as I indicated, we recently had our third board member leave the board, Patrick Megan, who served for the past year, and the board also thanks Patrick for his service on the board. So there's a to be determined item toward the bottom of that. It's listed as page 4, but it's actually the first page of the report, and the top of page 5. With suggested language, as of the date of the submission of this report, a new member has not been appointed. So Nancy, what we could do is either finalize the report with that language, or if there's an, if there's an appointment forthcoming, which we don't know, we could wait a bit to submit the final report. My thought would be to just finalize the report with this language that as of the date of the report, a new member has not been appointed. Does that sound okay to you?
I totally agree with that, Lynn. In my experience, the appointment process takes a little bit longer than we might like it to. And again, especially in these pandemic times. And I would think it serves the public interest to go ahead and finalize the report.
Okay. So, and procedurally, I guess I'll ask Ann, and I apologize, Ann, I forgot to mention our able counsel from the Attorney General's office, Ann McNeil, is also on the line. Ann, should I ask Nancy to move now for that amendment, or do it all at the end?
You can do it all at the end if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Good to hear your voice, and I apologize for my tardiness.
I had muted myself.
Okay, so then the next section that I'm looking at on numbered page 5 of the draft is basically discusses activities of the board, complaint statistics, some of which Nancy you alluded to in your comments on the prior year's work. There are basically statistics listed, the types of complaints. Some were dismissed without an opinion, a couple of those. In total, the board addressed 26 opinions, as I think you indicated. In 2020, we have we had two complaints pending as of July 1st. Is that still correct, Ann? Do we know?
I'm going to defer to Janice on that, but what we do is it's as of the end of the fiscal year. So for the report, that's accurate.
Okay, is that fine, Janice? That that section will stay that way because it's the end of the fiscal year as of January. It'll be July 1.
Yeah, I think that's it's your call, but of course it works for me. We have the board has issued those opinions in the beginning of the 2021 fiscal year.
Okay, that's fine. If that's what we've done historically, I'm good with that. Are you good with that, Nancy?
I am, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So then the next section basically talks about the provisions of the Act, the Open Meetings Act, where we found violations. There were 9 opinions, I believe Nancy mentioned that, in which we found violations, 7 of those of the minutes requirement in section 306, and some violations of the basic open meeting requirement in section 301, and 6 of those opinions. In 5 of the opinions, we have found violations of the closed meetings requirements in section 3305, 2 violations of the notice requirement, and 1 each of minutes requirement and the requirement pertaining to the attachment of a completed compliance checklist to the minutes. The draft talks just a little bit about the types of complainants that we had 21 people in all. We received complaints this year concerning 21 public bodies, 4 of which we determined were not subject to the Open Meetings Act. And as Nancy indicated, so I won't get much into this, there's a paragraph about conclusions from the statistics with respect to our workload, and which basically was about the same as the prior year, although there's not much we can take from that because the board addresses whatever complaints come to it regardless of workload. there's on page 8, top of page 8, there's a section talking about briefly about the complaints involving a failure to provide notice of a meeting. And there's also an attachment at the end of the report that I'll get to that basically summarizes all of the fourth quarter opinions from July 1 to June 30. July 1, all the opinions issued from July 1, 2019 to June 30, 2020. Then the overview of the year, the nature of complaints. Nancy touched on the important ones there, so I won't get into those. There were a few particular opinions that we discussed that the draft discusses. All of these, of course, are on the Attorney General's website. One that I found as a new member that I found interesting was near the bottom of page 9, the board's finding that a school board had violated the act when 2 of its members, although they weren't a quorum, exchanged text messages about the public business under discussion during the meeting. And I know that happens a lot in meetings with private entities where members of the meeting will be texting to each other about whatever during the meeting. But I found that to be an important point that the board made this year, that can be a violation. So the board there, which I also found helpful, strongly encouraged public bodies while meeting to avoid engaging in communications that involve public business that the public can't see, which seems self-evident, but it can be, I'm sure, especially in these uncertain times, easy to forget at times. So there's on the next page, there's a few more summaries of different opinions. One being, again, that I found interesting was that the 14 OMCB opinions 16, where the board was talking about parliamentary rules and Robert's Rules of Order, and the board reminded the body that the Court of Appeals, regardless of Robert's Rules of Order, has repeatedly stated that one purpose of the act is to prevent the crystallization of opinions in secret meetings. So even if public bodies are using those Robert's Rules of Order, they need to be mindful of that. And then there's, I'm going to move to page 11. There's a section on financial support and educational activities, where our report talks about this year, as in prior years, no funds were specifically appropriated for the board's operations. So the Attorney General's office provides the board with our administrators and counsels services, and posts what I found to be, as a new member, very, very helpful information on its website, the Attorney General's office website, which I would encourage everyone who's listening to go there, even if you have to go back and back as you have issues that come up. I just found it to be so well done and clear and comprehensive and extremely helpful. So I appreciate the Attorney General's office work on that, in particular, and Janice's work on that.
Lynn, if you don't mind, I would just like to interject a special shout out to Janice Clark, our administrator, because not to keep harping on COVID, but it really has been different this year. And Janice rolled with that and continues to reach out and be responsive. And Ann and her team are great, but I just wanted to give a special shout out to Janice. Thank you.
And thank you. I second that, Janice. Certainly we couldn't function without Janice. And please stop me as I'm going through this anytime you want to add anything. Nancy, I didn't mention that at the beginning.
Thank you.
The report then talks a little bit about the Act's training requirement and how the Institute for Governmental Service and Research at the University of Maryland hosts, maintains, and performs updates to the online class that many public bodies attend and rely upon to comply with the Act's training requirement. And we certainly thank that institute as well for its service this year to the public, as well as the Attorney General's office, who also work hard on the on training materials. And Nancy, you may know more about this than I as well, but the training this past year was provided through the certificate program offered by the Academy for Excellence in Local Governance at the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, through the Maryland Association of Counties, the Maryland Municipal League, and the Maryland Municipal Attorneys Association. So certainly we're appreciative to all of them for their work in training. Did you have anything to add to that?
I would just add, one, that they do a great job, and two, that for anybody who is listening, and I don't know where the people listening are from, but if you are involved with an entity subject to the Act, please encourage every division to participate in the training. I was surprised when we got one complaint this year from about the Prince George's, what I call the local management board, but the Department of Children, Family, and Youth Services. And the department admitted immediately that they had no idea that they were bound by the Open Meetings Act. And so I just encourage all listeners to make sure your various departments understand how they were appointed and whether they are subject to the Act, and if they are, to take the training. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Lynn again. That's great points. Thank you, Nancy. And Nancy, you mentioned the pandemic and how I think everything for all of us in the country and the state has been different in 2020, and no exception being holding public meetings by public bodies during the pandemic. So there's a bit in the report about mentioning the pandemic and how that's been a challenge for public bodies as far as compliance with the Act. Another piece of information that I found very helpful and that I'd like to point the listeners to if they haven't seen it is on the Office of the Attorney General's website, the Open Meetings Act page. There is some information with respect to holding public meetings during the pandemic. That is an excellent reference source. And there was also, as an informal guidance, but an excellent reference source. There's also an informal guidance. The report mentions that the Municipal Attorneys Association had published. So, you know, here again, that's a readily available information that hopefully will be helpful in these uncertain times in helping public bodies comply. Did you have any other thoughts, Nancy, about the pandemic and compliance at this stage?
No, I think that the public and the listeners need to understand that it's really incumbent on everybody to go look at that information and determine the best way in their specific jurisdiction to hold those public meetings in compliance with the Act based on that advice and information.
Thank you. And also you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, but different public bodies might need to do things a bit differently depending on their jurisdiction, depending on the nature of the body, et cetera, which is okay as long as they're, you know, ultimately in compliance with the Act and providing notice to the public and an opportunity to observe. Is that right?
Absolutely. Jurisdictions are of different sizes, of different compositions, of different technological abilities. And so they need to follow that advice and information to the best of their abilities to be in compliance in whatever way their resources allow them to be.
Thank you. I agree. So the next portion of the draft annual report basically talks about the access to the publication of opinions we've issued during the fiscal year. Those are all on the Attorney General's website. And then there's a section about legislation where this past year, no amendments to the Open Meetings Act were enacted. None had been proposed. And we've already talked about and Nancy, I think you and I agree that it's not prudent to recommend any legislation this year for all the reasons we've discussed. So when we adopt the language of the finalized report, if you look, Nancy, at the top of page 13, is it okay with you if we go with the board does not recommend any legislative study or action at this time?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that sufficient, do you think, or should we add anything there?
I don't think we need to. Oh, go ahead, Ann.
I didn't say anything.
Oh, sorry, somebody was talking. I think that we don't need to reiterate about the pandemic. That's covered elsewhere, and I think that we've already discussed it here publicly. So I think just the board doesn't recommend is sufficient.
That sounds perfect. I agree. Thank you. And then the attachment, the part 3 that I referenced, is the summaries of the opinions. Again, very well done, comprehensive enough, but not too detailed to provide a good, quick reference of all the opinions. So I was, again, very, very impressed with that, and I thank Janice and Ann for that. Did you have any comment, Nancy, about that section of the report?
No, I agree with your comments and have found nothing that I feel needs to be amended.
Okay. Okay. So was there anything else you wanted to talk about, Nancy, before we, I believe that's everything, before we discuss, whether to adopt, and I'd ask you to move to adopt the report, including the additions that we've discussed here today.
I have nothing further to add. So at this time, I will move to adopt, finalize and adopt the report with the additions that we've discussed here today.
Okay, and this is Lynn. I second that and agree. Thank you. So moving then to the next agenda item, which is public comments. We had asked that if any members of the public had any comments, that those be submitted in advance. We did receive one comment or a question, really, involving public bodies meeting during the pandemic, which we've talked about a little bit in this meeting today. Basically, the questioner asked the board to I'll just read it here. The comment and the question that the person submitted. He says many local governments are conducting meetings virtually during the. Wait a minute, I got a. It looks like I got some of it cut off. But basically, he was saying that during the pandemic, many local governments are conducting meetings virtually. Sometimes they broadcast, he says, on local cable TV, but there's not a public watch live proceeding. Sometimes there's a call-in number provided, which there needs to be for people who don't have a computer to listen in to the meeting. Zoom is used, that type of thing. And he asked if the board could comment on these proceedings, and how these proceedings are viewed by the board as we move forward. So Nancy, my thoughts are that, as a general matter, my personal opinion is that the board should primarily speak through our written opinions for purposes of consistency and clarity, because as we've talked about a little bit here, what might be reasonable for one board to do might not work well for another, or might not be considered reasonable under the Open Meetings Act. So, that said, there is, as I mentioned, a lot of very helpful information about conducting public meetings during the pandemic on the Open Meetings Act page of the Attorney General's office website. And ultimately, I think what the board will be looking for during this time, is what we look for always, is for public bodies to make their best good faith efforts to comply with the Open Meetings Act, whether during this emergency or otherwise. The questioner also asked, commenter also asked whether, or he mentioned that there was not uniformity among public bodies during this time. And as Nancy, as you and I have already discussed a bit here, their practices, the public bodies' practices don't necessarily need to be uniform with each other, as long as the public is given reasonable advance notice and the opportunity to observe meetings. So, it's very fact specific, which is why, I don't want to generalize about what people should do during the pandemic. In this meeting, there are those materials on the website, and those are my overall thoughts. What do you think?
I totally agree. This board is an advisory board. Once a complaint is filed, and we speak only through our opinions. And even beyond that, people need to remember that there are multiple jurisdictions and multiple, probably hundreds of entities subject to the act, from 3 or 4 people sitting in a conference room with no electronic capabilities to the biggest counties' school boards. And so things don't need to be uniform. They just, as you said, need to be in compliance with reasonable notice and an opportunity for the public to observe. So we can't really give step-by-step guidelines to any individual county. That's not our role. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you. So we're in agreement on that. So at this time, I would offer, if any of the observers or listeners have any comments they'd like to make, we're certainly happy to hear them. If anyone has specific questions, though, because for the reasons I've stated, I'd ask that those be submitted to the OpenGov email address. But does anyone have any commenters have any comments they'd like to make to the board today?
If you have comments, this is Janice. If you have comments, you can submit them via chat. I think it makes for less confusion muting everybody.
So we'll just wait a few minutes to see if anyone has any comments.
Yeah.
Anyone?
I'm not seeing anybody typing anything.
Okay. Well, thank you. Nancy, was there anything else that you wanted to discuss today?
No, I have no further items, and would move that we close the meeting.
So hearing nothing else, no one else has any comments. I second that motion. I would like to once again, before I adjourn, I would like to once again thank very much you, Nancy, for your work this past year. Also, thanks so much to Janice and to our counsel, Ann, for their support, without which this board, frankly, couldn't operate. So having said that, I will second the motion, and our annual meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.